people are determined to be deceased. 15 of the dead are children. The primary focus is still on search and rescue in the area, and there are hundreds of customers who remain without power and may well remain without power for a few days. And we also heard at that press conference that water and rain that arrived in parts of that area was double what was anticipated. I'm going to bring in now Tony Plahetsky. He's an investigative reporter for the Austin American-Statesman. Tony, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
For having me.
What from that press conference stood out to you? Were there any surprises?
I think one thing that is just coming into such tragically sharp focus is the scope of the devastation and the scope of the loss of life. The fact that we are now on the second day and that sunset is on the horizon and 27 Camp Mystic counselors are still missing at this hour is a fact that local officials just confirmed that is still the case. And I think that is just a breathtaking fact that continues to really underscore the pure tragic nature of what has happened.
Tony, have you been able to speak with any of the families who have either lost loved ones or who are waiting right now in agonizing circumstances to learn more?
I personally have not had direct contact with any of those parents, but I can tell you that the Camp Mystic families, that network of families runs deep, not only in Austin where I live, but throughout the state of Texas, and particularly in urban areas. There are a number of Camp Mystic families in the Houston area and the Dallas area, and the grief that is running through that network, that those bonds that get created not just among children, but among parents of those children, the grief is just indescribable, and so many families across the state and really across the nation are just beyond consolation.
Tony, you reported a story out today in the Austin American-Statesman, and I want to read the headline and to have you talk us through your reporting. The headline is, "Officials say nothing could have prepared them for the Guadalupe River to rise so fast. Meteorologists disagree." Can you talk about the disagreement here between the meteorologist and Texas officials?
Something that we are still working to understand. But keep in mind, what meteorologists do point out is that there was a flash flood watch that was placed that warned of the possibility of flash flooding. About 3 hours before this major flash flooding event, there was then a flash flood warning that actually warned of the potential of catastrophic floodwaters in certain areas, that floodwaters could become a disaster. Yet at the same time, and this is an important part of this discussion as well, the estimated rainfall totals from the forecast from the National Weather Service, state and local officials accurately say that they were nowhere near the amount of rainfall that actually fell. Yet other meteorologists say there was enough to at least tell the public that they should be on guard and that they should possibly take action should a flash flooding event occur. But at the end of the day, keep in mind, it is also true that the flash flooding that occurred along the Guadalupe River caused the river to rise something like 27 feet, according to officials, in a span of 45 minutes. Just a staggering rise in water, that powerful water, in such a short amount of time.
Tony, in your story, you interviewed some local officials, including the city manager, who said that an evacuation was not ordered because there is always this concern about creating a mass panic. The evacuation period is a very delicate balance. The city manager said, do you evacuate, put chaos on the road, and potentially risk people getting stuck on the road? I'm curious, are there incidents in the area in the past where there has been an issue like this? Like, why was that the side that they erred on, given the grave risks here?
It's a very legitimate question, and one that, as this all continues to unfold and we all try to make sense of it, one that we will be asking. But keep in mind, this is a flood-prone area, and these types of flash flooding events, certainly not to this scale, this magnitude, but are not entirely uncommon. I think another question that is also something that members of the public and others are going to try to get more of a handle on in the days to come, and that is what kind of emergency plans were in place by the camp to possibly conduct an evacuation should that become necessary.
Tony, to that point, what are the sort of next lines of questioning or concern for you, and what do you expect to hear Texans ask of their representatives, of local officials in the coming days? What kinds of answers do you think they're going to be demanding from all the people who already were starting to hear they want to see accountable for this?
Number one, in the days to come, just the processing of this unimaginable grief will continue to take center stage and be at the height of public attention. But at the same time, I do think there will be increased calls for some kind of full understanding about camps, their emergency management plans, their evacuation plans. What exactly kinds of systems did they have in place to ensure that people staying on their properties, particularly children along their properties, were protected should there be a catastrophic flood event like this?
Could you talk a bit about what the flood warning system is in an area like this that's very high risk? What was the chain of events that led to the camp being notified that this was a severe risk and the local community?
Still trying to unpack that at this time. What our understanding preliminarily is, at least, is that there are flood gauges along the river that do alert authorities the height of the river as water is rushing along the river. The challenge, from what we are understanding, again, preliminarily from local officials, is that those gauges, the water ran so fast and rose so fast that there just was not adequate time, according to them, to really warn people and get them out of harm's way.
Tony, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your on-the-ground insights. We'll be right back.
This is the reason why that it is essential for people to have a plan of action regardless of where they live, in understanding that the forces of nature pertaining to the disasters that we're seeing today is only escalating on a level unimaginable.
Rain. At least 50 people have died, including 15 children. Officials say there are still more than 24 people missing. Ella Cahill's family says they're still searching for her and 3 of her friends. The vacation home they were staying in has been swept away, according to the family. Their car is in the river, and some of their belongings have been found miles away. Now to Sarah Acosta with our affiliate KSAT. She is taking a closer look at the destruction left by flooding in Kerrville.
This home floated about the length of a football field down the Guadalupe River when the flash flood rose quickly into the homes on Waterfront Drive in Kerrville along Bandera Highway and Loop 534. And this is what's left of that home, completely leveled by the river behind it. And the neighbors tell us they fear that the people who lived here may have not survived. And we spoke with the people who live next door, and they walk us through what happened.
But I had no idea that something like this could happen. And then, holy stuff started to hit the walls, and my wife jumped up and looked out the back porch, and it was a river.
Scott Walden and his wife say the water came in so fast there was no time to evacuate.
By the time I went to get my keys to move my truck out of the way, just back up across the street, the water had risen and flooded my truck. The water got up there in the door about this high, and I looked at my wife and it was like, we need to get out of here.
That water too strong and fast, sweeping them down the river.
We went ahead and jumped out and we got washed down 3 houses, and we finally ended up snagged on a big bush. So we hung onto the bush until we got rescued.
They hung onto a crepe myrtle tree for about 30 minutes before they were rescued by police officers who formed a human chain.
We were kind of going, we hope this isn't it.
Walden says they are grateful to be alive, saying his destroyed home and cars are just material things.
Yeah, this is just stuff.
Neighbor Irma Cantu says they live a couple of houses over, fortunate their home is safe and they were able to evacuate quick enough. Feeling overwhelmed.
A feeling of sadness because, I mean, even the people that were here weren't expecting this to happen.
As they pick up the pieces and continue to look for neighbors and loved ones, she hopes it's a time where the community can stand strong.
Helping each other this is when we need to come together and help each other out.
And our thanks to Sarah Acosta with our affiliate KSAT there. As search efforts continue for those missing in the flash flooding in Texas, we are hearing stories of bravery from everyday.
You know, this is getting to where it's old hat pertaining to it being common. That there was a time whenever it wasn't common to hear of these great disasters that continues to keep happening. And they're not just happening here in America, but they're happening throughout the world. You know, the people over in East Tennessee and Asheville, North Carolina, pertaining to the flooding that went on back about almost a year now, and people in Waverly, Tennessee, in Humphreys County, give or take about probably 8 years ago, people up in Kentucky and Missouri and other parts of the country, they're experiencing the same thing. What is driving this? What is producing this? What is causing this? Well, your environmentalists continue to keep telling you that the environment is heating up above our heads pertaining to the loft, and we know that steam gets driven from a downward motion to an upward motion, and the hotter that the environment is pertaining to the steam, the quicker that the steam rises and the higher that the steam rises, and basically you're dealing with a situation where Mother Nature is lashing out because of the imbalances that mankind has caused regarding all this heat, draining all the oil from the ground, causing the heat to expand from the core of the earth. Because like I've told an individual today, I said, you know, if it was the sun doing this, causing the planet to heat up like this, we wouldn't be able to go outside without getting 3rd, 4th degree burns. So there's obviously something else that scientists and the meteorologists isn't telling us about pertaining to the core of the earth is now the heat is expanding, and these was the very things that line up with biblical Bible prophecy pertaining to as we shall see the days approaching that no flesh shall be saved. No flesh shall be saved because of these tragedies that are going to be falling upon to the planet. And if anybody should be held accountable, it shouldn't be the meteorologists, it should be the oil tycoons that deserve, as far as I'm concerned, to go to jail. Some of them deserve to go to hell because they know what they was doing, that they was causing irreversible damages to the planet. This is continually getting worse and worse and worse, and if it's not in the form of major deluges, it's in the form of droughts or it heating up in a certain particular area, and there's no explanation for the heat other than it coming from the under the earth into the atmosphere that we're living in, from major snowstorms, from the weather becoming just as erratic, to the form of major cold fronts coming down, to the point of seeing major heat waves inundate the northern areas. This is an ongoing emergency that obviously people like Donald Trump, your climate deniers, are still in denial of. And even Christ said that whenever you shall see these things occurring, to flee into the mountains, to know that these are the beginning phases of the great sorrows that shall fall upon the humanity in the last days. Christ knew that these things was going to occur. That's the reason why Christ had already predicted that these things was going to occur, because it says in the Bible that Satan will come down in great wrath because he knoweth his time is short. I had an individual question me about, well, why would God allow for this? Why would God allow for this? And I had to explain to this individual that's basically a school teacher, supposedly got a whole lot more sense than me. I told him, I said, it ain't a matter of God allowing for this to happen. I said, you don't understand that we're in the middle of a warfare that began thousands and thousands of years ago. And I said, basically, we're just collateral damage in between good and evil. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, the Bible says to pray that you're worthy to escape the things that are going to befall upon the planet, or pray that you can endure them, indicating that they will be falling upon the planet in the last days. Christ had already foreseen what we was going to do to the planet. Christ had already foreseen the great sorrows and the misery and the agony that was going to be falling upon humanity. We're seeing these events happening again and again and again. And until we get a check on what's actually occurring, not only scientifically, but also biblically pertaining to prophecies, we're only going to be basically turning around and around in circles like a dog chasing after his tail. We're going to be moving, but we're not going to be going nowhere until we fully understand what the hell is going on. Why is these occurrences continue to keep occurring again and again and again? Well, it's self-explanatory that what we're doing to the planet, we're the ones doing it. We're the ones causing it. This isn't God coming down in wrath towards doing this. It isn't God allowing for this to occur. It's we the people that's brought this upon to our own selves. And of course, Satan is a supernatural being. Even though he's an evil spirit, he's still a supernatural being. And of course, whenever Satan comes down in bringing destruction like this upon the humanity, the only thing that we can do is pray that we are either worthy to escape the things that are going to befall upon to the planet, or pray that we can endure them, indicating that yes, these things will be happening to the planet because Christ has already foretold these things was going to occur. It's very obvious what is happening, especially whenever you see it again and again and again. And like I said, the imbalances that's happening with these disasters are absolutely astonishing, scientists and meteorologists. It's astonishing because they don't have an answer. Well, I'm telling you what the answer is. I'm telling you what the core of origin is. It's the very thing that Al Gore, people like Al Gore, as well as myself, has been preaching now for over 25 or 30 years, that's been telling the people again and again and again. And as far as I'm concerned, the oil typhoons does need to go to jail. As far as I'm concerned, some of them do need to go to hell, especially those over in Saudi Arabia that created all this. This is an ongoing disaster that is only going to tragically get worse until we're smart enough to identify the core of origin and smart enough to put aside all these climate deniers, and in prayer and fasting and serving God is the only thing going to give us the ability to get out of this great storm. And it is a storm that we're in. Not only is it a storm pertaining to the forces of nature, but we're also in a storm pertaining to the indebtedness of this great nation. We're in a storm pertaining to the gun violence. We're in a storm pertaining to the suicides. We're in a storm pertaining to the overdoses. We're in a storm pertaining to seeing all the wickedness going on all over the countryside. These are storms. These are sorrows that the Bible taught and teaches us to prepare for. Pray that you're worthy to either escape or to endure, to flee into the mountains whenever you shall see these things occurring. Right now we're dealing with rain. We're dealing with water pertaining to these mass floods. Who knows? 5, 7, 10 years from now, it's liable to be actually volcano erupted, lava melting and destroying whole communities and villages. In other words, we'll go from one extreme to another. That as we shall see the days approaching, that no flesh shall be saved. I know it is a harsh, intense message coming from the messenger, but I'm telling you right now, we as a society are not going to be a society much longer if we don't pay attention to what is happening to the core of origin and what has caused this. And you can call me an environmentalist fanatic if you want to, that's fine. But I'm telling you right now, we are in an area, especially the Christians are in an area right now that we shouldn't be in, because the church should have already been taken out to the degree that the 7-year tribulation period should have already began. But because of the delay tactics and because of the superstitiousness and because of the unbelief, it has put us all in behind the 8 ball. I cannot emphasize enough in what's occurring. Now, whether or not you believe this or not, that will be up to you. But the good old days is just about over with until we reformulate in the supernatural world in how that we're going to try to straighten this mess out, because, my friends, it's only getting worse. That's undeniable. Proof is in the pudding. We're seeing more and more of these events, just like I said, back probably about 8 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, I don't know, maybe 6, I don't know, but whenever it hit up here in Waverly, Tennessee, what actually brought insult to misery in their lives is that a great deal of water was coming off the mountainside. Like I said, they got about 17 inches of rain, like 6.5 hours, and the railroad system pertaining to the levee that had been built up for the railroad was actually holding the water back until it gave way. As soon as that gave way, all of a sudden there was an usher of water that come into the Waverly, Humphreys County area that basically took out about 1/3 of their town. And it was the saddest thing that I've ever laid my eyes on, pertaining to how the forces of water can be that powerful. And they're still trying to recuperate from that. And if people ain't trying to recuperate from floods, they're trying to recuperate from fires. If people ain't trying to recuperate from fires, they're trying to recuperate from tornadoes. And if they're not trying to recuperate from tornadoes, they're trying to recuperate from other factors of life that's going on. We are under a bombardment right now. We are being bombarded by the forces of evil that's coming down in great wrath because it knows its time is short. There's no other explanation. There's no other illustration. There's no other reasoning behind this. I'm telling you right now, and it's not a matter of God allowing it, but we are caught up in the middle of this transition between good and evil, and it's not really our war. It's a supernatural entity's war. It just so happens we're in the middle of it, and we can choose what side that we want to be on, and whether or not we want to be on Christ's side or we want to be on the Antichrist side. Well, I choose Christ's side, even if I have to surrender my life, my physical life, literally speaking, within a matter of seconds. I'd rather know that I died in Christ than to know that I survived without Christ. Because survival at this point in time does not mean jeopardizing my soul over. I tried to give out warnings not too long ago pertaining to going up here in Paris and seeing all the hills and hollers. Same way in Waverly, Tennessee. I mean, I could go to areas and look. We've had a town to flood twice this year called Reeves, Tennessee. We've had Union City that's flooded 2 or 3 different times over by Lowe's and Green Acres Trailer Park. I mean, there's areas that, conscientiously speaking, that our first responders need to really look at very, very carefully and closely, because It's not a matter of if it occurs, kind of like school violence, but when it occurs. How are you going to respond? Do you have a plan of action? Can you get the people out of that area to the degree that you're not going to see a large portion of death and misery come into the area? It's one thing to lose possessions, worldly possessions, cars, houses, homes, and books and pictures, but it's another thing to lose your life, my friends. Those children had no idea whenever they laid their head down that night that this was going to occur. And like they said, just within a matter of 45 minutes, not only did it hit at night, but within 45 minutes, the river changed from being a moderate river to a deadly force that nobody had ever seen for the past 100 years. So these scientists and meteorologists are going to have to sit down and they're going to have to assess, just like around here, they're assessing for, instead of the cover being 2 foot in diameter, now they're going with a 4 foot diameter cover. They're going to have to sit down and assess the low-lying areas towards who is susceptible in basically being hit this way. If you're going to save life and limb, well, sometimes you can't save limb, but you can try to save at least life.
Bring Scott Dance into our coverage now. He's the global weather reporter for the Washington Post, joining me from Baltimore, Maryland. And Scott, first tell us about how much warning people had here, the ramping up of the severity of the forecast, and when.
Yeah, this really developed very quickly in the overnight hours. On Thursday, the National Weather Service told me they had briefings in the mornings with emergency managers on Thursday, knowing that there was a slight risk maybe of some flooding. But at that point, they were predicting, at the high end, like 5 to 7 inches.
Moderate.
So, it wasn't until after midnight that they started to see this intense level of moisture developing and just this sort of low probability, high impact scenario that they had known was possible start to develop. It was after 1 a.m. that they issued the first flash flood warnings, and then not until, and then basically, so 3 hours for people to start to react. And then at 4 a.m. is when the most intense flooding started to occur. And so that's when people, at this camp or campgrounds along the river, the Guadalupe River, when they really started to face the situation where they had no time to react. And so, there were cell phone based alerts that would have
Do or die. Same thing like Katrina. Whenever Katrina hit, everybody went to bed that night thinking, well, this was going to be a Category 2, maybe a Category 3 hurricane. But what they didn't realize, that it built so quickly, so dramatically overnight, that it became a Hurricane 5. And who would have thought that it would have done that just within a matter of about 4 or 5 hours? But it did. We're seeing weird things happen today with these disasters that normally we ain't never seen before. It's off the charts. It's totally off the charts. Just like I was trying to tell my friend today, I said it don't make sense to go down into the deepest part of the oceans 2, 3, 4, 5 miles deep, and at best that you can hope for is that the water temperature will elevate and stay the same. But it don't make sense that the deeper that you go, the warmer the water becomes. We are doing this to ourselves, and I continue to keep telling people that, pertaining to draining the precious oil resources out of the ground that was put there for a heat shield. 10,000 degrees is in the core of the center of the earth. Those temperatures are now beginning to accelerate and escape, and we're starting to see water warming that's causing the melting of the ice. Because if the sun was doing this in and of it by itself, we wouldn't be able to go outside without getting 2nd, 3rd degree, 4th degree burns.
This is something we're really trying to look at more in our reporting, that, we know that basic physics are that a warmer atmosphere it's capable of holding more moisture. And then you're getting these flows and atmospheric setups with a stationary system like this
Imbalances.
where they can just funnel moisture and, it's like wringing a sponge over and over again over the same area. And this is something that, for years scientists have been saying is a potential, side effect or consequence of the warming of the planet. And we're seeing it in action. I mean, I've heard from scientists who are saying, at this point, it's not necessarily a question of what role did climate change play in this or whether it played a role, but sort of how much. And, there are studies where they look pretty rapidly at it. They can say, a baseline level of moisture from, decades ago would have been this much, but here's how much moisture there actually was in the atmosphere. And then, how that translated into this crazy amount of rain that even a day before just did not seem possible.
Yeah, and hopefully the forecasting, everything that goes along with that is adapting to this change as well. Scott Dance, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks.
CNN senior White House reporter Betsy Klein has more on the federal response to the disaster.
Well, local officials are expecting that this is going to be a marathon of search and rescue and search and recovery efforts, and it is going to take the close coordination of state, local, and federal governments together to get that done. So here's what we know so far about the federal response. The U.S. Coast Guard is helping with those rescues. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem says that she has requested additional fixed-wing aircraft with thermal imaging. That is something that is going to help in the overnight hours as it gets dark and they continue to search and rescue. Separately, FEMA is engaged, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, along with the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Noem says that Border Patrol agents are stepping up. They've been tapped in with certain expertise and skills that they can use to help in this situation. But so far...
Now you see that situation of how bad it is. Could you only imagine if you was to hit Queens, Long Island, Harlem, some of the areas up in Boston or New York, intensify that times probably 100 of how many people's lives that it would affect and how much real estate that it would affect. We're going to have to work smarter if we're going to get out of this fix that obviously stupidity has brought us into.
Have to step up with additional aid. But there are two other things to keep track of as we continue to track the federal response here. Number one is that President Trump has been sharply critical of FEMA and says he plans to phase out that agency by the end of the next hurricane season. That is something we'll be watching closely for how the federal government coordinates with the state of Texas here. And separately, the president's fiscal year 2026 budget has steep cuts to some of these weather research labs that are vital to improving forecasts. These are the tools that can help detect these types of storms better. They are currently experiencing cuts. DOGE also has cut hundreds of staffers at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as well.
Causing a bad situation to even become worse and trying to save a nickel. Cutting off their noses to despite their faces and basically leaving the sovereign citizens of America that much more vulnerable. It's sickening. It really is. It's sickening in how that our government officials is trying to handle these crises.
This ancient system that has been left in place with the federal government for many, many years. But I do carry your concerns back to the federal government, to President Trump, and we will do all we can to fix those kinds of things that may have felt like a failure to you.
Of course, this storm was truly unpredictable. The water rose so fast, it was really unprecedented. We also have a little bit of good news, and that is that Congressman August Pfluger, who represents Texas Hill Country in Congress, says that he and his wife have been reunited with two of their daughters who were campers at Camp Mystic. He said, "Please join us as we pray for miracles." Betsy Klein, CNN, traveling with the president in New Jersey.
We are also following other news this hour. Israel sending negotiators to the new round of ceasefire talks with Hamas. But some Israeli protesters who've been demanding a hostage deal for many months are still out on the streets. We'll explain why after the break.
The billionaire boys.
It's horrifying. And to think that these occurrences are only going to continue to not only be just as horrifying, but going to actually become worse. Chokes me up to even think about it. Talk about being traumatized. Whenever people go through stuff like this, it traumatizes their lives. Their lives will never be the same. Never. They may, in a way, adjust to what has occurred, but they'll never get over it. They'll never get over it. Not fully. Just like a death in the family. I mean, there's a lot of people that they may learn to live with it, but as far as them actually, putting it aside of getting over it, they won't never get over it. They won't never get over stuff like that. It's too devastating in their lives. Good luck to each and every one of us. God bless America and God bless our troops. Please pray for the devastation of people all over this planet, especially those that recently just got through being hit down around Texas, in the center of Texas. And pray that our authorities, regardless of what level that they may be on, that they would take an assessment in looking at the surroundings pertaining to the geographic areas to realize that what if something like that was to occur, how could we save life in having a plan of action? That way we all won't be blindsided by what's coming around the corner. Good luck, God bless, happy 4th of July, and shalom.